My name is Antonio Ferrero, and I need to tell you something that happened to me when I was 87 years old. Something so impossible, so strange, that even now, 3 years later, I still wake up wondering if it was all a dream. But it wasn't a dream, it was real, and it changed everything about how I thought my life would end. Let me start by telling you what 87 feels like. Not the body part, though that's bad enough with the knees that crack and the back that screams when you bend down. I'm talking about the other thing, the invisible thing, the feeling that you've become a piece of furniture in your own life. People look past you. They talk around you. Your children call once a month if you're lucky, and when they do, you can hear them doing other things while you talk, washing dishes, checking emails, waiting for the conversation to end. I lived in Milan, in the same apartment where I raised my family. 4 rooms that used to feel too small when the kids were young, and now felt like a museum. Every corner had a memory, but memories don't keep you warm at night. My wife Paola died in 2001, cancer. After she went, the apartment got quieter and quieter until the silence became another roommate. I had 2 children, Luciana and Roberto. They both moved to Rome for work. Good jobs, important jobs, the kind that don't leave time for an old man in Milan who can't work a smartphone and still reads actual newspapers. My grandchildren, Luciana's kids, I saw maybe once a year. Christmas if I was lucky. They were polite, sure, but I could tell I made them uncomfortable. What do you say to an ancient grandfather who smells like old books and tells the same stories over and over? I became that relative people tolerate, not celebrate. The obligation, the duty visit. I was Catholic the way most Italians my age are Catholic. I went to Mass on Sundays, not because I felt close to God, but because that's what you did. That's what my parents did, what their parents did. I said the prayers by memory, same words for 87 years, but I'm not sure they ever went higher than the church ceiling. God felt distant, like a landlord I paid rent to, but never actually met. I believed, I suppose, but it was more habit than faith, more fear than love. By September of 2006, I had become a problem to solve. I could still walk, still feed myself, still manage the basics, but I was slow. I fell once getting out of the bathtub. Nothing broke, just bruises. But Luciana heard about it, and that was it. That was the beginning of the end of my independence. She came to visit on a Tuesday, which should have been my first warning, because Luciana never visited on Tuesdays. She had a folder with her, glossy brochures with pictures of smiling old people playing cards and doing watercolor paintings, nursing homes, assisted living facilities. She corrected me when I called them what they were, as if changing the words changed the reality. She sat me down at my own kitchen table and went through the options like she was presenting a business proposal. This one has a garden. That one has music therapy. This other one is closer to Rome so we can visit more often. I knew that last part was a lie. They wouldn't visit more. They'd visit less because the guilt would be gone. I'd be taken care of, professionally managed, no longer their responsibility. I didn't fight. What was I going to say? That I wanted to stay in my apartment, alone, getting older and weaker, until one day I fell and couldn't get up and died on my bathroom floor. That sounded worse than the nursing home, honestly. At least there I'd die with people around, even if they were paid to be there. We settled on a place called Villa Serena, Serene Villa. What a joke. It cost a fortune, first month and deposit, and Luciana explained very carefully that she and Roberto were splitting the costs, but I'd need to contribute from my pension. I signed the papers with shaking hands, not from Parkinson's or anything medical, from shame, from the crushing weight of knowing I'd become so useless that my own children were warehousing me. The move-in date was set for October 15th, 3 weeks away. I started going through my things, trying to figure out what fits in a single room, in a facility where everything is beige and nothing belongs to you. Most of my life was going to charity or the garbage. 87 years compressed into 2 suitcases and a small box of photographs. I started drinking more, not falling down drunk, just enough grappa each night to blur the edges, enough to sleep without thinking too much. I stopped answering the phone when it rang, which wasn't often anyway. I stopped going to Mass. What was the point? I was already being sent to purgatory. Might as well skip the practice run. Hey, quick pause here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Leave a comment telling me your location. It's always amazing to see how these stories reach people all over the world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Your support means everything and helps me continue telling stories that matter. Okay, back to what happened. September 26th. I remember the date because it was the anniversary of Paola's death. 5 years. I spent the day looking at old photos and working my way through a bottle of grappa that was probably too expensive to waste on self-pity, but I didn't care. By evening, I was properly drunk, the kind where everything feels both very far away and very close up. The doorbell rang around 7, insistent ringing, not just one polite press, but multiple rings, like whoever was there really needed me to answer. I was annoyed. I figured it was someone selling something, or maybe one of my neighbors complaining about something I'd done or hadn't done. I opened the door, ready to be rude. There was a boy standing there, teenager, maybe 15, 16, skinny in a way that wasn't natural, wasn't healthy. His skin had that pale, almost translucent quality that sick people get. His eyes were bright but sunken, feverish looking. He was wearing jeans and a regular shirt and old sneakers, nothing special. But there was something about the way he stood there, confident but gentle, that stopped me from slamming the door. He said my name, asked if I was Antonio Ferrero. I told him yes, asked who was asking. He introduced himself as Carlo and said he'd come to deliver something to me. I told him I hadn't ordered anything, that he must have the wrong address. But he insisted it wasn't a package, it was a delivery of a different kind, and asked if he could come in for just a minute. I should have said no. A stranger, a kid I'd never seen before, asking to come into my apartment. But there was something in his voice, this mix of urgency and kindness that I couldn't quite place. And maybe it was the grappa, or maybe it was loneliness, or maybe it was something else entirely, but I stepped aside and let him in. He walked into my living room like he knew the place, sat down in my old armchair without asking, the one Paola used to sit in while she did crossword puzzles. Something about seeing him there, this sick-looking teenager in her chair, made my throat tight. He got right to the point, told me he knew I thought I'd lived everything already, that I was just waiting to die in a nursing home. I asked him who the hell told him that, if my daughter had sent him to guilt trip me or something. He said no one sent him. He said he saw me in his dreams, that God showed him Antonio Ferrero and told him to come tell me a truth. I almost laughed, told him I wasn't interested in religious speeches, that if he was with Jehovah's Witnesses or some other group, the door was right there. I expected him to leave, to give up, to try some other poor soul. But he didn't move. Instead, he reached into a brown envelope he'd been carrying and pulled out a photograph. My heart stopped, actually stopped. I could feel it in my chest, just nothing for a second. Then a painful thud as it started again. It was a photo I hadn't seen in 62 years. A photo I'd hidden so deep I almost convinced myself it never existed. A photo no living person should have known about. It was me, 25 years old, in my military uniform, holding a baby. A tiny baby, maybe 2 months old, wrapped in a white blanket. My face in the photo was young, but already carrying shame, already looking away from the camera, already trying to disappear. I asked him how he had that photo. My voice came out as a whisper, barely there. My hands were shaking, not from age this time, but from pure shock. It felt like the floor was disappearing under me, like gravity had stopped working. Carlo looked at me with these eyes that were too old for his face, too knowing, too full of compassion that a teenager shouldn't be able to feel. He told me I had a son before I married Paola, that his name was Giuseppe, that I abandoned him because I was ashamed, because I was poor, because I was scared, that I built a new family and buried that secret so deep I almost believed it never happened. Every word was a punch to the stomach. Every word was true. He kept going, told me Giuseppe didn't forget me, that he died 3 years ago from cancer, and that he died forgiving me. I started crying, not gentle tears, but these horrible choking sobs that came from somewhere so deep I didn't know it existed. 87 years of guilt that I'd pushed down, 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 all coming up at once. But Carlo wasn't done. He told me Giuseppe had a son, my grandson. His name was Marco, 23 years old, a musician living in Turin. He told me Marco didn't know I existed, but that he needed me, and that I needed him. I asked him through my tears how he could possibly know all this, asked him who he really was, because no normal teenager shows up with impossible knowledge and photos that shouldn't exist. He stood up, and I could see how weak he was, how he had to lean on my coffee table to stay upright. He told me he knew, because God wanted me to know that my life wasn't over, that I wasn't going to the nursing home, that I was going to Turin instead, that I was going to find Marco and tell him the truth, that I was going to discover that family isn't just the people who abandoned me, but also the people who waited for me without knowing. He put a piece of paper in my hand, an address in Turin, told me Marco played violin in Piazza Castello every Thursday at 7 in the evening, said I should go on the first Thursday after Carlo's death, exactly 1 week later, said Marco would play a song that my mother used to sing to me, and that I would know it was real. I tried to ask more questions. How would Carlo die? When? Was he sure? But he was already moving toward the door. I called after him, asked if he was sick, if that's why he looked so unwell. He turned back and smiled, and despite how terrible he looked physically, the smile was genuinely happy. He said yes, he had leukemia, said he already knew the date he would die, October 12th. But he told me not to feel sorry for him, that he was happy, that his mission was to connect people, and that my mission was just beginning. Then he left, just walked out of my apartment and down the stairs, this dying teenager who knew impossible things, and I stood there in my doorway with a photo I'd hidden for 6 decades and an address in Turin and no idea what had just happened. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I sat in my chair with the photo and the address and went through every possible explanation. Maybe I was going senile and imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was the grappa. Maybe I was having a stroke and hallucinating. Maybe my daughter hired someone to play a cruel joke, though I couldn't imagine why. But the photo was real. I could touch it, feel the old paper, see the fading colors. And it was the actual photo, not a copy. I knew because there was a small tear in the bottom left corner that I remembered making the day I hid it away. The next day, hungover and exhausted, I started investigating. I called the hospital in Monza, asked about a patient named Carlo Acutis. They confirmed he was there but wouldn't give me any information because I wasn't family. I tried to visit, but they turned me away at the desk. Privacy regulations, they said. I thought about lying, saying I was his grandfather, but something stopped me. I spent the next 2 weeks in this strange liminal space, going through the motions of preparing for the nursing home while secretly clutching this impossible hope that maybe it was all real, that maybe I really did have a grandson in Turin, that maybe my life wasn't actually over. I thought about Giuseppe constantly, the son I abandoned, the baby in the photo who became a man I never knew, who died 3 years ago without ever confronting me, who apparently forgave me from his deathbed. The weight of that forgiveness, unearned and unasked for, was almost heavier than the original guilt. His mother was a girl I knew before I was drafted. Her name was Maria. We were young and stupid and careless, and when she got pregnant, both our families were horrified. This was 1944, during the war, and there was no room for unwed mothers and bastard children. Her parents sent her away to have the baby in secret. My parents told me to forget about it, that I had no future with a girl who got pregnant before marriage, that I needed to move on. I tried to do the right thing at first, Truly, I did. I said I wanted to marry her, wanted to be a father. But everyone told me I was ruining my life. And I was poor, so poor, barely 18, and scared out of my mind. When Giuseppe was born, I held him exactly once, the moment in that photo. Then Maria's parents took him away to raise him in the South, and Maria wanted nothing to do with me, and my parents told me it was for the best. I buried it. Joined the military, came back, met Paola, built a new life. Never told her. Never told anyone. Let Giuseppe become a ghost, a mistake, a past I pretended didn't exist. And apparently he grew up, had a son of his own, got cancer, and died forgiving the father who abandoned him. The guilt was crushing. On October 12th, I bought a newspaper like I did every morning. There, in the obituary section of a Catholic newspaper, was a small notice. Carlo Acutis, 15 years old, died of leukemia in Monza. Services to be held at such and such church. I sat at my kitchen table and cried for the second time in 2 weeks. This boy, this dying boy, had used his last days to visit a stranger and tell him about a grandson. What kind of person does that? I went to his funeral, stood in the back of the church, an old man nobody knew, and watched his parents grieve, watched friends his age cry for someone who died so young. I wanted to tell them what he did for me, wanted to explain that their son was extraordinary. But how do you explain something like that? How do you tell grieving parents that their dying child spent his final weeks playing messenger for God? Luciana called me the day after Carlo died, reminded me I needed to finish packing, that the nursing home was expecting me in 3 days. I told her I wasn't going, just like that. Said I'd changed my mind. She lost it. Started yelling about deposits and how they couldn't get their money back, and how I was being selfish and difficult. Asked me what I was going to do instead. Just stay in my apartment falling apart. I told her yes, exactly that, and that it was my decision and my life. Roberto called next, trying to be the reasonable one, explaining calmly that I wasn't being rational, that I couldn't take care of myself much longer. I told him I'd managed for 87 years, and I'd manage a while longer. He said I was making a mistake. Maybe I was, but it was my mistake to make. On October 19th, exactly 1 week after Carlo died, I got on a train to Turin. I told no one where I was going, packed a small bag, left early in the morning, and watched Milan disappear through the window. My hands shook the whole journey, not from fear but from possibility. What if it was all real? What if I really had a grandson who played violin in a plaza? Turin was cold that evening. October can be brutal in northern Italy, and I hadn't dressed warm enough. I got to Piazza Castello around 6:30, early, and found a bench where I could see most of the plaza. My heart was hammering in my chest in a way that couldn't be healthy for an 87-year-old man. At 7 o'clock, a young man sat up near one of the fountains. He had a violin case, dark hair, a thin build. Couldn't see his face clearly from where I sat, but something in the way he moved made my breath catch. He started playing some classical piece I didn't recognize, something technically impressive that made tourists stop and listen. I waited, watched. The plaza was busy with people finishing work, tourists taking photos, the normal rhythm of a Thursday evening. He played several songs, and people dropped coins in his open case. And I sat there, frozen on my bench, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Then he started a new song, and I knew. I knew from the first three notes, Mamma son tanto felice, an old Neapolitan song my mother used to sing to me when I was small, before the war, when the world was simpler. A song I hadn't heard in probably 70 years. A song I'd never sung to anyone, never even mentioned to Paula, because it belonged to a past I'd left behind. My legs gave out. Good thing I was already sitting, because they just stopped working, turned to water, completely useless. I started crying again, third time in a month, which was more than I'd cried in the previous decade. Tourists probably thought I was senile, this old man sobbing on a bench, but I didn't care. He finished the song, and people applauded. I couldn't move, couldn't do anything but sit there shaking. The crowd dispersed, people moving on to dinner or home or wherever people go. He started packing up his violin, counting the coins in his case. I made myself stand up, made my legs work through sheer force of will, walked over to him, this young man who might be my grandson, this stranger who might be family. I asked him, voice shaking, why he chose that particular song. Told him it was unusual, not something you hear street musicians play often. He looked up at me and smiled, and I saw it. I saw my mother's smile on his face, the same slight crookedness on the left side, the same way the eyes crinkled at the corners. Genetics are spooky that way, jumping generations, making ghosts appear in the faces of the living. He told me it was a strange choice, he knew, but that his father used to sing it to him, that his father died when he was 20 years old, that his father said his own grandmother, someone he never met, used to sing it, that playing it was his way of honoring his father's memory. I asked him, heart in my throat, if his father's name was Giuseppe. He froze, actually froze mid-motion, violin halfway into its case. Asked me how I knew his father's name. The look on his face was confused, suspicious, like he thought maybe I was some kind of stalker or crazy person. So I told him, right there in that cold plaza, with evening turning to night, and the fountain making white noise behind us, I told him everything, who I was, what I'd done, the abandonment, the cowardice, the secret I'd kept for 62 years, the boy named Carlo, who showed up at my door with an impossible photo and impossible knowledge, the funeral, the train ride, all of it. He listened without interrupting. His face went through so many emotions I couldn't track them all. Shock, confusion, anger, sadness, something else I couldn't name. When I finished, we just stood there in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute. Then he started crying, and he hugged me. This stranger, this grandson I never knew existed, just put his arms around me and held on, like I was something precious instead of something shameful. He told me his father used to say he forgave his own father, whoever he was, wherever he was, that holding grudges only hurt the person carrying them, that he believed in grace even when it wasn't deserved. He asked if he could call me Nono, grandfather. I'd been called many things in my 87 years, but never that. Not really. Not with meaning. My other grandchildren said it like a title, a formality. Marco said it like a gift. We went to a cafe, one of those small places that smell like coffee and old wood. He told me about his life, about Giuseppe, who worked as a carpenter and apparently never spoke badly of the father who abandoned him, about losing him to cancer at such a young age, about struggling to make it as a musician, playing in plazas for tourists and tips because orchestra jobs are hard to come by. I told him about my life, the real version, not the sanitized one I usually told, about meeting Paola and hiding the truth from her, living with guilt like a second shadow, about Luciana and Roberto, who visited less and less as the years went on, about the nursing home I was supposed to be in right now, sitting in a beige room playing cards with other abandoned old people. He asked why I never tried to find Giuseppe. It was a fair question. I didn't have a good answer. Fear, shame, cowardice, all the same reasons I abandoned him in the first place. I told Marco his father deserved better than me. Marco said maybe, but that forgiveness wasn't about deserving, that his father taught him that. We talked until the cafe closed. Then we walked around Turin, this strange pair, an old man and a young one, connected by blood and miracles, and a dead teenager who apparently worked for God. Marco showed me his apartment, a tiny place in a not great neighborhood, but clean and full of music sheets and books. Offered to let me stay on his couch. I stayed for 3 days. We talked more in those 3 days than I'd talked to another human being in years. Really talked, not just pleasantries and small talk. He played violin for me in his apartment, beautiful pieces that made the walls vibrate. I told him stories about his father that I shouldn't have known but did, fragments from the photo, the one moment I held him. On the 3rd day, Marco asked me where I planned to go, if I was going back to Milan, to the nursing home. I realized I didn't want to go back to that empty apartment, to children who saw me as a burden, to a life that was just waiting to end. I asked him, voice shaking again because I was asking for something I had no right to ask, if there was any way I could stay in Turin, near him, not with him. I wouldn't impose like that, but maybe in the same city. Maybe we could have dinner sometimes. Maybe I could hear him play. He said yes before I finished asking. Said he'd help me find a place, something small and cheap that I could afford on my pension. Said we could have dinner more than sometimes. Said he'd like having family nearby. It took a month to arrange everything. I had to go back to Milan, face Luciana's fury, pack up my entire life. She called me selfish, told me I was making a huge mistake, that I'd regret it. Roberto was quieter but equally disappointed. Neither of them understood. Neither of them asked why. They just saw an old man being difficult, inconvenient, refusing the neat solution they'd arranged. I didn't tell them about Marco, didn't tell them about Giuseppe. Some truths are too big to throw at people. Maybe someday I will. Maybe not. Their judgment stopped mattering to me somewhere in that plaza in Turin. I found a small apartment, 2 rooms, affordable, 10-minute walk from Marco's place. We established a routine, dinner twice a week, sometimes more. He'd come over or I'd go to his place. Sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence, him practicing violin, me reading. Sometimes we'd talk for hours. He introduced me to his friends, young musicians and artists who treated me with casual kindness, like I was just Marco's grandfather. Nothing weird or complicated about it. They didn't know the history, the abandonment, the guilt. They just knew I was family. I started going to his performances, plaza concerts and small venues, wherever he played. Sat in the audience like a proud grandfather, which I guess I was, even if I'd done nothing to earn it. Watched him make beautiful music and felt this mix of pride and sadness and gratitude so intense it hurt. 3 years have passed now. I'm 90 years old, living in Turin, having dinner with my grandson twice a week, sometimes more. My apartment is small, but it doesn't feel empty. The silence isn't crushing anymore. I have purpose again, something to wake up for besides habit. Luciana calls occasionally, brief, obligatory calls. I can tell she's still angry that I refused the nursing home, that I moved away, that I'm not the easy problem they tried to make me. Roberto visited once, met Marco, didn't ask too many questions. I think he suspects there's more to the story but doesn't want to know. That's fine. Some people prefer comfortable lies to complicated truths. I go to Mass now. Really go, not just showing up out of habit. Because I figure if God can send a dying 15-year-old to deliver a message to a stubborn 87-year-old man, if he can orchestrate a meeting in a plaza based on a song from 1930, if he can turn abandonment into redemption, then maybe he's worth paying attention to. I think about Carlo all the time. Wonder what kind of faith it takes to spend your dying days delivering messages to strangers. Wonder if he knew how many people he touched, how many lives he changed. I visited his tomb once, in Assisi where they moved him. Stood there like so many other pilgrims and thanked him. Thanked him for seeing me when I was invisible. Thanked him for caring about an old man he'd never met. Thanked him for giving me back my life when I thought it was over. I think about Giuseppe too, my son, the baby in the photo who became a man, who became a father, who died forgiving someone who didn't deserve forgiveness. I wish I'd known him. Wish I'd had the courage to find him, apologize, be present. But regret is a luxury of the living, and he's beyond needing my apologies now. The best I can do is be present for his son, be the grandfather I should have been 50 years ago. Marco tells me I'm too hard on myself, that his father didn't hold grudges and neither does he, that family is about moving forward, not staying stuck in past mistakes. He's wise for 26, wiser than I was at twice his age. Maybe that's Giuseppe's legacy, raising a son who understands grace. Before I finish here, I'm really curious. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you're finding value in this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep sharing these experiences with all of you. I want to tell you why I'm sharing this story. Not for sympathy, not to make excuses for the terrible things I did. I'm sharing it because I know there are other old people out there who feel like I felt. Invisible, irrelevant, a burden, waiting to die in some facility where nobody knows your name or cares about your stories. I was 3 weeks from that nursing home, 3 weeks from accepting that my life was over, that I'd become nothing but a problem to solve. And then a dying boy showed up at my door with a photo and a mission and changed everything. If you're 80, 90, if your kids stop calling, if you feel like you're just taking up space, please listen to me. Your story isn't over. Not until God says it's over. And sometimes when you think you're at the end, you're actually at a beginning you never saw coming. I thought I'd lost everything. Thought I'd die alone in a beige room, playing cards with strangers. Instead, I'm in Turin, having dinner with a grandson who plays violin and calls me Nono, and makes me feel like family even though I did nothing to deserve it. I thought my biggest sin, abandoning Giuseppe, would follow me to the grave as my defining shame. Instead, it became the path to redemption, not because I earned it or deserved it, but because grace doesn't work that way. Grace shows up in the form of a sick teenager with impossible knowledge. Grace manifests in a plaza where a young man plays a song his great-grandmother used to sing. Grace looks like a grandson who forgives before you even ask. I spent 62 years running from my past. Turns out my future was waiting in that past the whole time. My grandson was there, playing violin in a plaza, not knowing I existed, but connected to me by blood and music, and a saint in sneakers who saw what needed to happen and made it happen. Carlo Acutis died at 15. Leukemia took his body but couldn't touch his mission. People are calling him blessed now, on track to sainthood, and I believe it. I absolutely believe it. Because I'm living proof of his work. An 87-year-old man who was invisible became visible again. An old man who thought he had no purpose found one. A grandfather who didn't know his grandson existed got 3 extra years so far, and counting. 3 years of dinners and conversations and violin music. 3 years of being called no-no. 3 years of mattering to someone. 3 years that were supposed to be spent in Villa Serena playing cards and waiting to die. I'm 90 now. My knees are worse. My back screams more often. I move slower than I did at 87. But I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not irrelevant. I'm Marco's grandfather. I'm the old man who shows up to concerts and claps too loud. I'm family. And if a dying teenager could give that to me, if God could orchestrate that redemption, then I have to believe he can do the same for anyone. You're not too old. It's not too late. Your children might have written you off, but that doesn't mean your story's over. Mine wasn't. Mine was just beginning. I just didn't know it yet. Took a saint in sneakers to show me. So don't give up. Don't accept being discarded. Don't let other people decide when your life ends. Because sometimes, when you think you're at the end, you're actually standing at the door to something beautiful. And all you have to do is have the courage to walk through it. I did. At 87, with shaking hands and a heart full of guilt, I got on a train to Turin and found my grandson, found my purpose, found proof that God sees even invisible old men who made terrible mistakes. If he saw me, he sees you too. Remember that.